welcome to the fourth Department of English seminar for this academic year. We are delighted that you could join us for today's program. At this point, Ms. Jade Johnson, a senior in the Department of English, will introduce our speaker for today.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's my pleasure to introduce the speaker for today, Dr. Lisa Bratton, Assistant Professor of African American Studies, Department of History and Political Science. Dr. Bratton, a native of Vallejo, California, received her BBA in Business Management from Howard University, her MBA in Marketing and Finance from Atlanta University, now Clark Atlanta University, and her MA and PhD degrees in African American Studies from Temple University. She has served as a small business consultant for Georgia State Small Business Development Center and is both an accountant and financial analyst for Emory University's Office of Grants and Contracts. In the area of African American Studies, she has worked as a historian for the U.S. National Park Service Tuskegee Airmen Oral History Project, traveling the country documenting the stories of the airmen. She has served as an officer of the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated and currently serves as a member of TAI's National Scholarship Committee. Her diverse research interests include economic exploitation in South Africa's diamond industry, female genital mutilation in East Africa, the Tuskegee Airmen, and images of Africans and African Americans in advertising. She has served as a principal investigator for an oral history project funded by the South Carolina Humanities Council for the historic Brattonsville, the York County, South Carolina plantation on which her ancestors were enslaved. Her upcoming book, I Am the Forever, chronicles the lives of Green and Melinda Bratton, her great-great-grandparents who went from enslavement to being among the first African American landowners in the county. A recent research experience was being awarded the Taiwan Fellowship, and she spent 4 months in Taipei researching the early Dutch presence in Taiwan. Her topic today is 4 months on the amazing island of Taiwan, the opportunity of a lifetime. Please welcome Dr. Lisa Bratton.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody awake? Okay. Well, I'm going to make one request. I'm not going to ask people to move. I want to, but I said, no, they look so comfortable. Don't make them move. But that nobody use their phones. People in my students know that, but if you're on your phone, then you're not paying attention, and I'm going to make sure that this is very interesting, very interactive, so I would appreciate that. Plus, it's very, very, very distracting to a speaker. So let's get started. All right. So how did I end up in Taiwan? And I thought I saw Dr. Carter come in. Yes, Dr. Carter is the Director of International Programs. And I told Dr. Carter when I met her, I said, I apply for everything. And you all should get in that habit, you students and you not so students. Just get in that habit, just apply for it. So it was not on my radar to go to Taiwan, never really thought about going to Taiwan. Okay, thank you. But when she called me emailed me with the opportunity, I said, oh, I remember I said I'll apply for everything. So as it worked out, I ended up getting it and had the absolute most amazing time ever, and I'm going to share that with you. So here are just a few general photographs of Taiwan, the flag, and then to show you just kind of what the island looks like. And then the picture in the top middle is the food. There is food everywhere. Why? Because nobody has a kitchen. I didn't have a kitchen. I had and I don't use a microwave anyway, and I had a refrigerator, about this tall, and a teapot because everybody drinks tea. And that was it. So in terms of being able to cook, but people just eat out on the street. You just go out every day and get your little bag of food and come back home. So that's why I have that picture of food there. Also, Taipei 101, as you can see, Taiwan's tallest building, and it has a ranking in Asia, maybe the second tallest building in Asia or something like that. And then a picture of the temples, and the temples are everywhere. I'm going to talk also about that. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and interrupt me. I'm not going to be, real formal, and I won't lose my place because I have it all lined up here, what I want to tell you. Finally, for my students, there's a sign-in sheet, so if you can sign in before you leave, that'd be great. All right. So people often confuse Thailand and Taiwan. When I tell people I'm going to Taiwan, they said, oh, are you going to have some Thai food? Okay, no. I'm going to have Taiwanese food, but this is just so that you'll see where Thailand is and where Taiwan is. A very common mistake, but Taiwan is an island off the east coast of mainland China, and Thailand, as you can see, is much further south. So Taiwan and mainland China are separated, as you can see, by the Taiwan Strait. And where I was living, Taipei is in the capital of Taiwan, which is the capital of Taiwan, is the far northern tip of the island. So I want to tell you a little bit about the history of Taiwan, but I never start any history of anybody talking about when the Europeans got there. That's not the beginning of history. You have to begin at the beginning, and it's unfair to the indigenous people if you start their history of 10,000 years perhaps on a day when the foreigners got there, okay? So I just want to tell you a little bit about the indigenous people of Taiwan. Before any outside intervention in their island nation, the Taiwanese lived along the coast, along the west coast, and then before the Dutch and the Chinese got there. And as you can see, you can imagine people coming from mainland China and also coming from Indonesia. Indonesia, which, let's see, you can see it on the map. Indonesia would be about right here. And that's where the Dutch came from. And so you have people coming from there, kind of invading them on the west coast, and they migrated and moved further into the mountains, and they became known as the mountain people. But they were trying to get away from the invaders coming in. And these are just some additional pictures of people who live, and some of the indigenous people of Taiwan. And we're going to talk more about that too. We'll kind of get some sense of them, a little more sense of them. And then the distribution of the indigenous people. There were several nations of indigenous Taiwanese, and these are just some of them. There are actually more. But they kind of, over time, combine and intermarry and become one nation, etc. But these are some of the larger groups of indigenous people in Taiwan. So the Portuguese were the first Europeans to learn of Taiwan's existence, and you notice I did not say that the Portuguese discovered Taiwan. They did not discover Taiwan. Taiwan was already there. They didn't discover Taiwan any more than the Europeans discovered America, okay? So when the Portuguese first saw Taiwan, they looked at it and said it's a beautiful island, so that's what they named it. The name that they gave it was Formosa, or Ilha Formosa, which means beautiful island. So this is an early map. This is one of the earliest maps of Taiwan that I could find, dated 1726. And you can see what's interesting about this map. I'm going to just see who's got their thinking cap on. What do you notice right away about this map? Yes, ma'am.
Is it because it's flat surface, so not, I guess like the flatness are maybe
Going this way instead of...
like the globe, yeah.
Okay, so what this is, and I think what I'm hearing you saying, Brittany, is that the island looks like it's pointed the wrong way. Actually, the island it's longer, it's shaped like a tobacco leaf, up and down. But in one of the earlier maps, they're showing it kind of odd. That's the way they understood the world to be. And then you can see China right here. And actually, China's on the west coast, not on the south coast. So I just thought that was interesting. People who take my class know I really, really like maps. So I just put this in there so you can see. So the Dutch took control of Taiwan in 1624, taking the control away from the Portuguese. And they controlled the island until 1662. And one thing that, if you take world history, you'll find about the Portuguese is that as soon as they get to a new island, they build a fort. That's one of the first activities that they do, is build a fort. And they built 2 forts in Taiwan, Zealandia and Provincia, which are probably, I took the bus there, but maybe about 5 miles apart, maybe 10. miles apart, and they're located in the coastal city of Tainan. And I'm going to talk also about that that trip. But you can see how far it is on the map. It's a 5-hour drive, but Taiwan has a high-speed rail that is out of this world. So that 5-hour drive took a little bit over an hour. Yeah, it's an amazing place. It really is. So this is a drawing rather of one of the trading ships that was sailed by the Dutch East India Company, and that's what that long word is. That big word is the Dutch East India Company. And the Dutch East India Company was so powerful. It was almost like it really did have the power of a country. And they minted their own coins that they used in the colonies that they took over. They imposed their own money system on the territories that they conquered. And that's a picture of one of the coins. So my research was on the Dutch presence in Taiwan and South Africa. So when I wrote the research proposal, I thought to myself, oh, I do African American studies, and so if I have to study Taiwan all summer, I'm going to be so bored. So I have to add what interests me, which is Africa. So that's why I did a comparative study, not realizing that the history of Taiwan was as fascinating as it was. But I didn't know that, so I added my own piece in because I thought I would be asleep all summer if I had to research only Taiwan. The research fellowship required that we use the resources of their library, and so I'm going to show you that too. So here are two of the forts, and I went to both of them. Fort Zeelandia, which is the first fort built in 1635, and then Fort Provincia, which was a smaller fort built in 1653. So 1662, what happens, Zhong Shengong, or Koxinga, kicks the Dutch out of Taiwan and establishes Chinese control over the island. And what I thought was really interesting, in the 4 months that I was there, I saw basically no indication that the Dutch were ever there. No indication that the Portuguese were ever there. Not a street name, not a building, not nothing. As opposed to in South Africa, where the Dutch language is one of South Africa's 11 official languages. The Dutch had a very strong presence in South Africa, and they still do to this day. So there are a lot of memorials and tributes to Koxinga because he kicked the Dutch out. The Chinese especially, revere him for that reason. Any questions or comments before I go on? Yes, ma'am.
I know you mentioned that you noticed that there wasn't even a strong Dutch presence in Taiwan, but when the Dutch were in Africa, today they still have some of those same, I guess, remnants from when they were under Dutch control. Why do you think that Africa has preserved that Dutch presence, whereas with Taiwan, once they, became Chinese, I guess, under Chinese control, they kind of didn't have Dutch presence?
That's a good question, and you should have come to Taiwan with me so you could research this with me. But no, that's a good question, and so you don't want to really, and how I'm trying to answer that very politically correct. I really should just say it, but the Africans were. Let me change your. I'm going to change your term. I wouldn't say that the Africans preserved the Dutch presence. It wasn't by choice that the Dutch are there and have such a strong presence there. It's the Koxinga and his army, he brought 10,000 people to Taiwan to kick the Dutch out. And the Dutch didn't have that strong of a presence. In terms of being able to fight off 10,000 people, they just weren't strong enough to do it. And they weren't populous enough to do it. And in the case of Africa, we can talk about that for the next 3 days, but the Africans weren't as, perhaps they were more welcoming, but let me just say this, some of the early documents that I looked at were the first Portuguese writing when they came to Taiwan and what they were doing. They wrote everything down. And then what they were doing in Africa. And their main goal in Africa was to endear themselves to the natives. That's the terminology that they use. We're going to endear ourselves to the natives. So we're not going to fight them. We're not going, it's illegal to kill them. It's illegal to fight with them. It's illegal to cheat them, just so that the Dutch East India Company can become more endearing. That's the language that they use. And they slowly, as we know the story of South Africa, they slowly encroached further upon the land, dividing the people. They had more deadly weapons of mass destruction, and so that's the short answer. It's a lot more detailed than that, and I don't want to make it appear as that the Africans were weak or not intelligent, because that's not the case. It's kind of two different situations.
Yeah, I think I would just like to add a little bit to clarify, especially the Dutch presence in South Africa, which you mentioned. You said it was not by choice. I think it would be appropriate for our young students to understand that up till 1994, the South African system of governance was apartheid, where the Dutch, or the white minority, had control over everything. And the trend today in South Africa is that South Africans are reverting to their ancestral names. A place like Pretoria is no longer called by South Africans Pretoria. It is Tshwane. So with time, we can only suspect that what happened in Taiwan would happen in South Africa.
It could very well, but my research I see that my research focused on really the earliest intervention, because my question was that I asked myself, how could a boatload of Dutch people manage to really take over so much of the world? The Portuguese, the trend was the Portuguese were the main, were very seafaring. They had the strongest ships, and they were among the strongest people sailing the seas at the time. So in so many places in the world, the Portuguese would come, see a place, quote unquote, discover it, right? And then leave. And the place, for example, the Bahamas, other places, just stayed in their indigenous state, maintaining their own traditions and cultures until the Dutch come. And then when the Dutch come, they begin to establish a permanent base and build a fort. And that's the beginning of the end. When they build a fort, that's kind of the beginning of the end of the indigenous culture, or the indigenous culture as we once knew it. And so, but that was really my question. How could I'd say a boatload of people kind of take over the world in the way that they did, or take over so many nations and cause so much destruction of indigenous culture all over the world? But to your point, that's true. But I've just found it quite interesting that when the Dutch were kicked out of Taiwan, they were really kicked out of Taiwan. In terms of there's no evidence of their presence, and however in South Africa there is. And back to Chastity's question, like I said, I don't look at it so much as a preservation. I look at it more as force, or as having another culture imposed upon you. And when they began to desire a permanence in South Africa, they desired a permanence, and they still have a permanence up until today. Now, in terms of them perhaps getting, to the point where there is no such Dutch presence in South Africa. I've been to South Africa, and there's a really strong presence there. So I mean, that's not to say that it would never happen, but it's very different. And I'm talking, when you talk about the 1600s, very different when the way the Chinese were able to kick them out and leave not a single trace that I could find. After being there 4 months, I saw nothing. So just an interesting kind of historical. Other questions? It's an interesting topic. Thank you both for bringing that up. All right. So I took a few research trips while I was there. I had a lot of fun. We're going to talk about that too. But this is the Fort San Domingo, which is a fort built by the Spanish. The Spanish had a brief presence in Taiwan also from 1629 to 1642. The fort that they built is at Tam Shui, which you can see is just outside of Taipei, probably maybe not even an hour on the subway, the MRT. But this is another research trip that I took. I wanted to kind of at least get an idea of what the Spanish, what the Spanish, when the Spanish came, what was perhaps like for the indigenous people. But their presence didn't last long at all. Siasat, and I didn't know about this Siasat. These are a nation of indigenous Taiwanese people. I didn't know about them when I got there, but I soon found out. Siasat legend states that a nation of short, dark people taught the indigenous Taiwanese how to farm. Okay, you'll see this legend, right, repeated throughout Asia. So if you hear a legend repeated so many times, you kind of start to wonder. But all right, this is the trip that I took to, just some photos that I took from the research trip to the Siasat Folklore Museum. And before I got there, I knew about the legend, and I had also seen pictures of some of the indigenous people from Taiwan, who, as you can see, look what can you tell me about the way some of the people look? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Heather Hubbard. I'm a sophomore psychology major, and just from looking at them, they strongly resemble Native Americans.
Native Americans? Okay. All right, anybody else? Okay, Dr. Tillman?
Yes, the nose features, the nose, the structure of the nose, the facial features on the nose, and how it's structured is very similar to African.
Okay, Dr. Hill?
I'm looking at the jewelry, it looks like a Maasai beads, yeah.
Absolutely. My perception when I saw it, when I first saw some of the early, and I have another picture to show you, the first picture I ever saw, very African to me. And then I have also a copy, I showed you a picture of a book called The African Presence in Early Asia by Runoko Rashidi, and edited, I can't read that little word, edited by Runoko Rashidi, I think maybe thank you, I can see the first word, co-written? That little word by Ivan Van Sertima, who, as you may know, wrote They Came Before Columbus, and has done a lot of, he's deceased now, but he's done a lot of work. Runoko Rashidi is not deceased. You should follow him on Facebook, because there's a lot of good information. Every day he posts something really interesting. This is the book called African Presence in Early Asia. But when I saw these pictures and others, I saw the strong African presence. So when I went to the Siasat Museum, I asked the gentleman there if he knew about the African presence in Asia. He says, yeah, I know all about that. It's a legend. So I pulled out some pictures on my phone that I had taken at another museum in Taipei. I said, look at this. He said, oh, well, maybe it's not a legend. So I just let the pictures stand for themselves and the research done by other historians. That's just one of my travel partners and I, my friend Lisa, at the entrance of the Siasat Folklore Museum, and even looks, the outside of it looks as if it has an African presence. And throughout the museum there are drums, djembe drums, just saying. And there are dolls, and there are all types of, you would think, if you didn't know, you would think that you are in an African museum. Okay, my research was funded by Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we were charged to conduct our research at the National Central Library, which is equivalent to Taiwan's Library of Congress. The library is huge, the collections are enormous, and they have quite a bit of material that I could read in English. So this is the view from my favorite study area. So the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial is right across the street. So this is where I used to sit and study and do my work and look out the window and do my work. Oh, and this is the memorial at night. It's I mean, the pictures really can't do it justice. We even went to an outdoor concert there one night that was just phenomenal. So now I'm going to move away from the research. If you have other questions about the research, I'd be happy to talk about that too. But I also kind of want to talk about the fun end of it, which there was a lot of fun. So chance adventures. Taiwan, when I first decided the initial topic that I had was Taiwan's struggle for independence and whether or not, what that struggle was like in terms of Taiwan becoming an independent nation. And then I said, no, I'm going to do something different. I went away from that topic. But this was maybe the first or second day that I got there. I come across a protest rally about Taiwan and its independence. And the Taiwanese will protest about anything. You'll see a protest almost, if you look for one, there might be one every week. So sometimes they're very small and sometimes they're large. I was there on May Day, and so they were protesting, May 5th, and they were protesting on May Day. I don't know what they were protesting about, but that was a pretty large, and actually that protest made the news. This one was kind of small, but they are very activist-minded individuals, is what I could see. This is just another chance encounter. There will be a festival or a presentation or a dance performance anywhere. You might find it anywhere on the street. So this particular day, this was some anniversary of a Buddhist, some marking of an anniversary of something that happened in the Buddhist tradition. That's as far as I could get in terms of trying to understand from another person. Very few people there speak English, so maybe I have to ask about 8 people to get directions before I get to someone who actually speaks enough English to help me out. So that was what I was able to glean, what was going on this particular day. I'm going to talk too about people being fascinated with me. Fascinated with the skin, fascinated with the hair, etc. But I was waiting for a friend at the train station, and these ladies came up and they wanted to interview me about schools in Taiwan. I said, I don't teach school. A lot of African Americans or foreigners are there to teach English. And I said, well, I don't teach English. So they said, well, we're going to ask you anyway. Okay. So she asked me about schools in Taiwan. I told you, I don't know. But okay, you know, I'm sitting here waiting. I have nothing else to do but wait, so okay. Signs and symbols. This is a sign, I just took it because I live in Georgia, and this said Georgia Soul, so I just thought that was an interesting picture. But this one, I was in Tainan at Fort Zeelandia, and a young lady had her umbrella out because, let me tell you why they have their umbrella out when it's not raining. Why do they have their umbrellas out when it's not raining? Not a cloud in the sky, but they have their umbrellas out. Why?
To avoid tanning.
Not to get dark.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They don't want to tan. They don't want their skin to be dark because dark skin is associated with lower class and it may be there's some racism of course there too, and that people who get dark that means you have to work outside. And that means that you are lower class. So this young lady, she was I don't know, she might have been about 10, but she had this umbrella out. And I wish I had been, had taken the whole umbrella because it tells a story. So the umbrella shows a girl who's so upset because her hair is in its natural state. And she is so upset, but her friend shows her a product, and so she used the product on her hair, and now her hair becomes straight. So I wanted to take pictures of the whole umbrella, but I said, this is a little girl and I don't want to be all intrusive, and she couldn't understand what I'm saying. And okay, so I just asked her, Joe Chapian, to kind of take a picture. And so she said, okay, and I just stopped there. But that's the story shown on the umbrella, and it's by Procter & Gamble. Big surprise there, but okay. That's what that is. So I mentioned earlier that people were very fascinated. Before I got there, I had been warned by people who said, they're going to walk up to you and touch your face. They're going to walk up to you and touch your hair. And that happened a little bit, but they would ask first. And can I, okay.